month I'm away travelling again, so I can't show you progress on the coat, but I thought I would take this opportunity to answer some of your questions about this project. There have been some pretty in-depth replies, particularly about the sleeves. So I did ask in the sleeve video, do you think I've made them too big or are they about right? I had a theory that they were looking about right because they kind of look a little bit bigger than they do in the book on the original coat, but they're a little bit lighter fabric at the moment and they might have drooped over the last 100 years. So there were a number of opinions aired in both directions. Some people thought they were too big, other people thought they were just perfect. So I'm going to read a couple of the comments. Flippity Gibbet says, I think the proportions of the sleeve are still not quite right. The forearm and wrist opening on the original, for example, is much wider than you have on yours. There is a very graceful, even and full sweep to the sleeve, which is fairly open at the wrist. Yours pulls in at the forearm and wrist for a more snug fit, more like a dress sleeve. Fair comment, I did draft it from a dress sleeve pattern, it's a good point. And the puff at the shoulder is too much by quite a bit, perhaps 1 or 2 centimetres. There's a big difference between them. Your collar is also a bit large, even accounting for the wiring. All of the proportions and lines just need a little more refinement and it'll be perfect. Okay, so let me just take a look at that. The problem with the pictures in the book and the digital pictures I've got are they're all front and back. I haven't got many pictures of the side, but my pictures from the museum are of the side of the coat. So I'm going to bring up one of those pictures and compare it. I think Flippity Gibbet has got a point. The cuff of the sleeve does look quite narrow. I've made it come down quite narrow at the cuff, and I think it is going to need to be a bit wider, so that will change things a little bit. Although, I don't know, I still think the puff of the sleeve is all right. And further to what Flippity Gibbet said, Natalie Chim had a great idea, and she said, the toile is looking great. Apologies from unsolicited advice. No, I was asking for advice. One point to remember is that the heavier velvet will drag down some of the sleeve puffiness, so I wouldn't alter them until you see them in the velvet. I was kind of going that way as well. It's at that point where it's close enough that it might be better to see it. Rather than getting it perfect in calico, it may be that the velvet will have an effect as well. So I will think on that. Gretchen Brister says, do you suppose the puffy sleeve has a lining the shape of the basic sleeve? So might that keep the puffiness puffy? So what she means is there is sometimes with these big sleeves, the main fabric of the big sleeve hides the fact the lining has been made with a much tighter pattern, so it kind of holds its shape a bit better. I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't know for sure because we haven't seen the inside of this coat, but I think the lining is going to be same as the coat sleeve because the coat is designed to be worn over a ball gown or over an evening dress, and that would mean that you'd need room inside the sleeve, lots of room in there for the sleeve of the dress, which might be fairly big. P. Hart also says, I don't think the sleeves are too big because the wearer wouldn't want the velvet crushing the sleeves of the gown underneath. If it were closer fitting and laid flat, the sleeve underneath would be crumpled. So let me show you a picture of a ball gown of the period, which we can see in this book. It says High Star Masterworks from the Brooklyn Costume Collection at the Met. And there is a picture in here of a Worth gown of about 1898, which is a famous butterfly gown. And you can see there the size of those sleeves. So if the sleeves of the gowns of that period were fairly puffy, you would need room. So I think the sleeve lining is going to be the same shape as that. It's not going to be a tighter sleeve inside. What it will have to hold it out, I think, probably is it will have a bit of tarlatan or something stiffer just inside the top section of the sleeve, just kind of down to there. And that will enable it to puff up but still have enough room in it to have the sleeve of the gown inside. Elizabeth Moody, I don't know whether this is the corset maker, but hello, Elizabeth. One thing I noticed when I was at the V&A today and looking at this coat, fantastic, you went to see it. It does look fantastic in the museum. It looks like it had a small gore in the sleeve at the outside and below the elbow. Yes, it does. That may be what gives it some of that room below the elbow towards the cuff. And I've been looking at that for a long time and thinking, was it a slash made in the sleeve and it was opened up and that white piece of lace was put in there? Or is it like a patch? Was the velvet taken away and it was just a piece replaced and it's just decorative? So that's a question I would like to ask. And I haven't seen it on any of my photos yet. I've got to look at them a bit more closely. If I can get in close enough with any of them, I would like to see the weave of the velvet at the top of that little V to try and see whether it looks like it's a piece of velvet with the weaver going across like that and it's kind of gone like that where the velvet's been opened up, or if the weave of the velvet is consistent all the way across, then a piece has been cut out and the little triangle has been put in. So that's something I've still got to figure out. I haven't found a photo yet where I've got a close enough picture to see that. So I don't know, I might have to go back to the museum just to see that. Chiara Keeper says, to me the mock-up looks so much better than the one on display. Not because the velvet coat isn't stunning, it absolutely is, because it's clearly meant to be worn, not sitting on a mannequin on display. It just looks so lifeless and dull on display compared to how it looks being worn. This is exactly why I do this. Charlie King Miller also says, I was honestly not into this coat when you picked it, but I'm finally sold. Seeing you prance around in the mock-up brings it to life in a whole new way. I can't wait to see this progress. This is exactly why I do this. These clothes, these historical clothes, are so beautiful, and yet we can never see them quite as they really were because we see them static, just sitting there on a mannequin, frozen in time, or even worse, if they're not in good enough condition to be on a mannequin, they're just flat in a drawer. So to be able to bring them to life and recreate them so that you can put them on a person and see them move on a body, it brings that craftsmanship to life, and it does justice to the craftspeople who made these clothes in the first place, because you get to see how they really worked and how they really looked. It adds a whole extra dimension to see them moving, as well as to be able to see the shapes and the colours and the fabrics. So that's really what excites me about doing this work. You get to see how stunning something looks in a photograph, and then when you bring it to life, of course it's not the same, it's not the historical garment, and we're always approximating what it really would have looked like. But the closer we can get, the more we can get an impression of being able to go back in time and see what the garment really looked like at the time. Janet Holmes, meanwhile, says, what colour is the room painted? It looks very serene. And Diane says, I love that green in your sewing room. Do you mind sharing the shade and brand? Your room looks stunning, thank you. It is Vert de Terre by Faber and Faber, which is a slightly more expensive paint line, but they use less synthetic rubbish in it, and the paint didn't smell at all when Rose and I were painting the room. You know, we had the windows wide open as you do, and we were worried that, you know, we don't want to be inhaling the paint fumes, but there were no fumes. The paint didn't smell at all. It was really lovely to use, and it's a really beautiful colour and very tranquil, and I really love it, so thank you very much. So it's called Vert de Terre, as in French, green of the earth, and it's by Faber and Faber. Stone Clay Acres says, I want the coat pattern. Yeah, I guess I ought to release that at some point, shouldn't I? I don't have a pattern company, so I'm not so much going to be able to just grade it and do all the stuff to make it all different sizes. That's not in my skill set. But we'll see. I wonder whether there's a pattern company who would like to collab with me on that. HB says, I think you could fund all your future projects if you started a dressing gown company based on this pattern, with added pockets, of course. Well, to fund all my future projects if I started a company, I kind of did that 15 years ago. I do have a company that pays for all my projects. The YouTube channel doesn't make money. The YouTube channel actually loses money because I have a professional editor and all of that. But yeah, Foundations Reveal basically pays for me to live and pays for me to do this. So thank you to all our members. You allow me to have a team who create all the wonderful content. You have mentors who support you, and you support a number of people, and you support the ability to make free content for people who could never afford to be a member. So thank you. Renee Murray says, if the fabric is thicker for a coat versus a silk blouse, darts are probably better instead of gathers or pleats. This is a good idea. Yes, Renee, I think you're right. Usually sleeves are gathered into the armhole, like I was explaining in the sleeves video. This one has those 3 darts, as well as all the gathers. I think Renee is right. I think the reason it isn't just an aesthetic decision, I think it is a decision that has something to do with the amount of bulk in the velvet. I think that the darts have been taken just to take a ton of fabric out so that the gathers don't have to do so much of the work, because if you gathered all that fabric in, with a thick fabric you can't gather in as much, so I think the darts are doing some of the work of gathering it in, just because velvet is a thick fabric. And corresponding to that question, Emma says, looking at the picture at 2046 in the sleeve video, it almost seems like the dart is a dart tuck. Does anyone else see this? I think what she means is like a pleat, like it's not sewn down. I think the darts are sewn in, and I've got a picture here that I think shows that. I've got one of the Google Arts and Culture pictures here magnified up, and you can just see one of the darts, and it does look like it's sewn. So, Kate Hurst says, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this turns out. I never really noticed before, but once you got the coat on with the collar, it suddenly jumped out at me how similar in style the collar, sleeves and overall look of the coat are to some of the clothes you see in Tudor portraits. There is a Holbein portrait of Christina of Milan wearing what looks like a coat-type garment over a gown, and the coat has a similar but less pronounced stand-up collar and sleeves puffed at the shoulders, and also another of Jane Seymour's sister Elizabeth, which looks a little bit like the same thing from a distance. I wonder whether the early 1900s styles were imitating the Tudor look on purpose, or whether it was just a coincidence. Well, these kind of clothes, this is kind of officially classed as being arts and crafts era. So that kind of era, it was a time when fashion was looking back to a sort of romanticised medieval period. So there was a lot of this creating much looser fitting clothes that had a more sort of fantasy medieval look about them. So not perhaps Tudor so much, although there may have been a little bit of that in there. Fashion has cycles, you know, shapes and silhouettes have cycles. So when you look at a style of later in history and see an earlier style in history, it may not have been deliberate on the part of the designer, but there is always a sense of things being cyclical. And there are some designers, of course, who did deliberately recreate historical styles. In a lot of ways, Worth was a historical costumer. He was fascinated with the history of fashion. So this isn't Worth, but there is a correlation between arts and crafts fashion and earlier fashions, not necessarily Tudor. Certainly that idea of being a much more looser and more flowing shape was kind of a reaction to very fitted Victorian styles, and it was kind of a throwback to much earlier periods in history. Flippity Gibbet also says, also call me crazy, but this coat and others like it give me just a little bit of a robe volante vibe. Perhaps it's the cyclical fashion movement from highly structured to more unstructured. So let's find you a picture of a robe volante. That would be in this book. There aren't many robe volantes around because it was a very loose fitting dress of the early 18th century. And usually, I've only got a drawing here, which will show up well on camera, there. And they didn't survive. I'm not sure we've got any that survive. There may be one or two in the world. But these styles, because they were so big and loose and there was so much fabric, they were reused and remade into later fashions, so they don't survive well. But yeah, it's a big loose gown with big sleeves. Yeah, you can see where Flippity Gibbet is seeing that. So again, it's just the cyclical nature of fashion. Guy Smith, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. The collar is giving me Time Lord counsel, and if anyone looks like a time-travelling historian right now, it's Cathy Hay. Thank you very much. I mean, when I was making the collar, I was thinking I'm going to look like Tim Curry in a polyester cape coming down in a lift. But no, it does look, I see where you're coming from there. I'm also getting with that huge collar, I'm almost going to a Babylon 5 phase if you're into like old science fiction from the 90s. You know, who was it? Ambassador Kosh with his huge collar and his huge encounter suit. There's something about that in there as well for me. Cindy Roberts says, do you do the embroidery on the pieces and then sew it together? Or will you be sewing it together and then doing the embroidery? Or a combination? Well, usually the embroidery is done first. You take the pieces of fabric, you'll see this later on when I get to that part. These pieces of fabric are stretched on a frame, and this goes back, centuries. This is the way it's commonly been done across cultures, I believe. The embroidery is done with the fabric stretched on the frame in the shape that the pieces are going to be, and then it's taken off the frame and sewn up into the garment. In this case, and in the case of another dress I've done in the past, some of the embroidery covers the seams. So what I did with my oak leaf dress years and years ago was I did all of the embroidery I could on the frame, and then I started piecing it together, and as I pieced two pieces together, I would do the embroidery that went over the seam and then add another piece and do the embroidery over that seam. So it's a little bit of a combination depending on where the embroidery is, but most of it will be much easier to do with the fabric stretched out flat on a frame. So you'll see that part later on. And then Pam Matthews says, just an idea, won't the embroidery change the give within the material? I don't think it will. I don't think it will change the weight. I don't think it will change much about the fabric because it will be done with the fabric stretched flat. So I don't think it will make much difference. The velvet is going to be fairly tightly woven if I get to use the kind of velvet I'm hoping to. So I don't think the embroidery should change much. And finally, there have been a few questions on the earlier video, the first mock-up video, about why I was fitting the coat over this dress, which is a very close-fitting summer dress. Aren't you going to wear this with costume? Aren't you going to wear this with modern clothes? Or are you going to wear it with historical clothes? And I don't really know. I would like to be able to do both. I want to be able to wear it with modern clothes more often, or with day clothes, or with a walking skirt, I guess. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to wear it with yet. But as for how I'm going to make it, I'm still going to make it kind of as historically accurate as I reasonably can. Partly because, as I said earlier, I kind of want to see the museum piece step out of the glass case and be on a body moving, and so we can see how it really looked back in the day. Partly it's also because I kind of want Orlando's wardrobe. I've always watched the movie Orlando, which is based on the Virginia Woolf novel, and wanted Orlando's wardrobe. And what I mean by that is Orlando is a character who grows up in the 16th century. A sort of magic spell is cast on Orlando, never grow old, never die. And so Orlando lives for 400 years. And the point of the novel, it's a feminist novel. For the first few hundred years, he lives as a man and then wakes up some point in the 18th century as a woman, so switches gender. Can you imagine Orlando's wardrobe going back 400 years of male and female gendered clothing? I mean, wouldn't it be amazing to have that wardrobe and just be able to pull stuff and like mix and match from 400 years of history? So I kind of like the idea of the fantasy that this was an actual historical piece in my wardrobe that is nevertheless magically strong enough to put on and wear. So that's just, I would like to make it as historically accurate as possible. So I have fitted it over my modern underwear, my modern clothes. I possibly could have worn more clothes when I fitted it. I get what you mean, because if I wear it in the winter, I'm going to be wearing more clothes. That may come back to haunt me, but it is fairly loosely fitting, so I think I might get away with it. So I hope this was interesting for you. I will be back from my trip next month and able to make more progress on this. Ask any more questions you have in the comments below, because I may do this again the next time I go away, which will probably be in February again. So until then, enjoy, and I hope you're having fun with your own projects.